that is one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you made this thought-provoking post on COVID and nutrition and the immune system and mortality rates. And I think the trouble about written text is that you miss so much nuance and context and tone and what did she mean and what did he mean. And so I would love, if you're down to talk about it, basically, has COVID changed the way you approach and see nutrition? What has it highlighted? And I guess I want to touch on, actually, let me go there first. Let me not even get too much. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. For myself personally, like I wouldn't say it's changed the way I view nutrition, but it's certainly changed the way that we have been able to deliver it to our clients that I guess in this pandemic have really appreciated the role that they have in looking after their health rather than handing over all their power, which we do see happening in, other areas of the world and certainly in those that I guess aren't yet understanding the importance of our immune system right now. So when it first started, when sort of COVID first started, the start of the conversation was like, right, what can we do to make sure we have this really beautiful, robust immune system, which means we're going to decrease our susceptibility to viruses, of which COVID is a virus. And not so long after that, we actually started to see a lot of research in China coming through about the role of vitamin C. So there was literature coming through that was really supporting what we were already saying. Some of the studies being done in China were, very high doses of intravenous vitamin C. So not exactly what we were talking about, by eating your berries and your broccoli and your capsicum and things like that. But from a foundational point of view, we need to make sure that we do have a high dietary intake of vitamin C. So it's easy to meet the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, but that's like to avoid things like scurvy, right? Not to optimize our immune system, especially in times of dire need. So yeah, with my clients, I've been talking a lot about obviously just making sure we've got a high dietary intake of vitamin C. And then now with a greater understanding of how much vitamin C we might need for the specifics of COVID, looking for supplementation to complement the diet. So that's been like the start of the conversation around vitamin C in particular.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I've seen a lot of that research you're referring to, especially the intravenous stuff, and then and I get it from Dr. Rhonda Patrick talking about how, vitamin C stores will be very readily depleted. And so you need this consistent top up on a daily basis to maintain those robust effects on the respiratory system. Do you have a dose scale recommendation that you prescribe to yourself or that you recommend to your clients?
Yeah, I mean, for most people, like a lot of the literature is actually only looking at 1,000 milligrams. So this is way before COVID days.
Yeah.
So that's why we see a lot of supplements on the market where their serve is 1,000. So 1,000 milligrams. So that's pretty standard. But from a safety perspective, we know that vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin. So it's not fat-soluble, which means it could build up in the body if we were to take excess, because it's water soluble. If we were to take a little bit too much, we'd know about it, but we'd either, wee it out or we'd end up with diarrhea, right? So obviously we don't want to create that situation, but we've got a lot more room to move with water soluble vitamins like C. So a lot of my clients are usually taking more like the 2.5 grams, especially anyone who's needing more nervous system support or is a bit more stressed, especially at this in this period of our lives, because like you said, and what you were learning off Rhonda Patrick, when we're stressed, our body literally steals vitamin C to make stress hormones like cortisol. So our vitamin C is then not available to support our immune system, right? So we do need to look at higher doses. 2.5 grams is also not high. You could be taking that multiple times a day. And in some clients, they definitely need like closer to 5 grams a day. So we could do that split into 2 to 3 doses. It all depends on bowel tolerance, because some people are super sensitive to too much vitamin C. And so we'd split their doses up a little more. If that doesn't apply to you, we can just do morning and night doses and get 5 grams in a day.
Interesting. And do you think that is probably a great maintenance supplement to maintain long term, chronically? Or do you think cycling is more of an intelligent approach?
Yeah, I agree with you, cycling, the latter, because right now we need more.
Yeah.
So we take more.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the vitamin D conversation in winter alone, not to mention in a global pandemic.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's really relative, like most things in nutrition and health should be. So let's say on the other side of the pandemic, when hopefully it's, at least in Australia, it's no longer winter, our vitamin C requirements would be different again. So we might then have a maintenance dose of, 1,000 to 2,000 or 2 grams, which is then different to that 5 grams, which we can do in winter in times of high need.
That makes sense. And you mentioned vitamin D, and the reason you hear me typing away is I'm trying to pull up some of the studies and notes that I was taking on this stuff. And what we saw with vitamin D, and I'll read it out, that in this one study, supplementation cut risk of respiratory illness, so the risk of respiratory illness infection, by 50% in people who were deficient, and a decreased risk by 10% in people with normal vitamin D levels. So we see benefit in decreasing respiratory illness. Now, it's not specifically COVID, there's other research on that, but we see benefit whether you're deficient or you have adequate levels, even though the adequate levels probably aren't adequate.
I know. Well, that's the point with reference ranges, isn't it?
Yes.
Adequate is often very low.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to talk about that and vitamin D?
Yeah, I'd love to, because the vitamin D is another really hot topic at the moment, because there is research about the role that it plays with the respiratory system, and there's been specific studies around COVID. So, of course, it's a really hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Most people know vitamin D as that sort of sunshine or sunlight hormone. It's actually a hormone, not a vitamin.
Exactly.
So it can confuse people a little just by nature of its name. But I also think that a lot of people are really kind of more aware around vitamin C and its role in bone health and preventing osteoporosis, but it's actually a really potent antiviral agent. So what is COVID? A virus. So we're wanting to make sure that we're really optimizing our body's ability to fight viruses. And vitamin D plays a huge role in supporting our innate and adaptive immune systems, which means, again, like, we're all about building robust immune systems so that we can be exposed to somebody that is infected, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to catch that really contagious virus. Obviously, there are so many factors, so let's not misinterpret what I'm saying. But the studies on the levels of vitamin D that we need are really interesting to me, because the optimal levels using Australian units are the 100 to 150 nanomoles per litre. And this is what I've been talking about for years. Like, all of my clients, we set that goal to have a minimum of 100.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of people, like even yesterday I had a client, young, healthy female of my age, and her vitamin D was 47. So it was really low. And there's lots of risk factors with that, from an immune system point of view, from an immune health point of view, from a hormone point of view. So yeah, we've got to do what we can do to get those levels up. Now, you would have seen the numbers in the research. A lot of it was looking at 10,000 international units, so supplementing with quite a high dose. Now, I personally don't normally use that dose, but this is not a normal situation. It's like a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to mention, though, is the 10,000 is been pretty clearly shown to be beneficial, but it's only being dosed that high initially. So for someone that's got that low vitamin D, we might do 10,000 international units every day for a couple of weeks to get them right up to 100, and then put them on a maintenance dose so that they can maintain between that optimal reference range of 100 to 150. And so that optimal reference range is, again, supported in the literature, and the maintenance dose might be more like 3,000 international units. And then when you can get in the sun, when it's summer, your dose will change again.
I think that's a really important point you made. It's like we're cycling depending on blood markers, season, environment, and lifestyle. And we're not just indiscriminately prescribing supplementations based on research or what he says or she says.
Well, I agree, which is why even that 10,000 international unit research just concerns me a little bit, because what we will see is an article like that discussed on Facebook, everybody just taking 10,000 international units and not even knowing what their blood levels are.
Yeah, exactly.
There's issues in Australia because vitamin D was taken off the Medicare list. So lots of doctors are actually reluctant to test that. So we sometimes can't even get the data. Yeah, you might have to pay for it, which not everyone wants to do. And then we're not getting our individual levels, nor are we retesting. So that cycle, like that cyclic process should be, okay, yeah, I know I need X international units now, and I'm going to retest in 6 months and adjust accordingly. So we can't just take information off Facebook and then apply it to ourselves blindly.
But that's so common now, right? And so that's why conversations like this are so important to bridge that gap. And I want to talk about vitamin D continually because, like, I think again, like you said, people call it a vitamin, but it's actually a hormone. And to put context on it, it's like, imagine like a hormone like testosterone, when that's really low in males, or estrogen plummets through menopause, or we get a progesterone dominance, or whatever hormonal imbalance occurs, we treat that seriously, okay? Yeah. But vitamin D, it's not treated as seriously, yet it controls about 1/24th of the human expression of the human genome, right? So a huge amount of genes are being switched on and switched off and controlled by this amazing hormone. And I think it's very important that such a simple supplement probably can have such a big benefit. Do you think that's one of the most important to take? Do you have like kind of a list in your head of like a top supplements?
Yeah, well, right now I do, like, which is again different to what have been in, 2019. But like my rhetorical question, like right now, is imagine if our government was handing out international units of vitamin D to everyone, rather than just putting us in lockdown and creating a lot of fear. Now, I'm not saying that lockdown is not important. Right. So again, please don't misinterpret what I'm saying, but I just think we're off track with how we can, spend $2 billion on a vaccine that may never be found, yet our premier is telling everybody that the only solution is the vaccine, which is then creating a lot of fear in people who don't need any more of that. Yet the vitamin D conversation is being like largely suppressed. And those of us that talk about it online are being significantly abused. And, it's just unfortunate that we can't have a really educated conversation around what the research says and how we can be proactive rather than reactive about our health. So yeah, C and D are 1 and 2 for supplements right now.
Okay, definitely want to talk about that. But before, because that's so important. But before to clarify about vitamin D, I think when people just say take vitamin D, maybe you have different thoughts on it, but taking it with K2 to prevent overcalcification, which can occur through high vitamin D supplementation. Do you consider that important? I know it's something I implement and recommend. Is that for you too?
Yeah, certainly at high doses. Yeah, so if you were just doing like a normal sort of, your 1,000 international unit, there are plenty of high quality brands on the market that don't co-prescribe with K2, but then of course the higher dose we go, which is this conversation that we're talking about now, absolutely looking at K2, which is one of our other sort of really important micronutrients, but it's one of our key fat soluble vitamins, which we definitely need, my goodness, but we also don't want to overdo, because again, they're fat soluble, so they can build up in the body and be problematic. It's rare, but we still want to have that on our radar.
For sure. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that point. And this is the benefit about like a podcast or a face-to-face conversation, is that you're limited with characters in an Instagram post and like...
story of my life.
I know, right? But do you
I feel like I have to write like at least 500 words of some kind of a disclaimer so that the trolls don't come at me. And then I still get criticized because I haven't discussed the whole global pandemic in 300 characters. Like, come on.
I know.
Instagram.
And look, you're being very reasonable with your emotion right now. Like you can,
It's the yoga in me.
Yeah. Because for me, I feel that frustration, which is why I try and have all meaningful conversations through this means, right? Yeah. But you still want to deliver information and content through the means that you have. So let's clarify some things, because to back up a little bit, you made the point about, well, our government's spending X amounts on restrictions and PPEs and medical equipment, which is critically important. Critically important. Let's not push that aside.
Downplay that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. However, why isn't the conversation from a systemic government level being discussed where, well, they'll talk about masks and they'll talk about being reactive, locking down like you said. But what if we didn't have 50 to 70% of the adult population overweight and obese?
Oh my God, you're speaking to the choir here, because this is exactly what I was talking about on Instagram only a week or two ago.
Yes.
So it's sort of like, if there's a few diseases which we can cluster in that sort of diabesity epidemic.
Yes.
So we've got type 2 diabetes, an avoidable lifestyle disease. We've got obesity, an avoidable lifestyle disease. We've got insulin resistance, same thing. All these inflammatory conditions which are killing 10,000 people every year in Australia, and no one is talking about it. Imagine if the government was like cancelling sugary foods right now instead of closing down restaurants. Like, the food supply that we have access to, and ironically, the food that people are buying when they go to Coles and crazily shop, is all the refined foods, high in sugar, high in refined carbohydrates, perpetuating our global health crisis, which is a significant risk factor. Like, when we look at the death rate, of course, we never want anyone to die. So no one is saying that the death rate is not significant, but it's something like 95% of people have a significant comorbidity like insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and obesity.
Yep.
So like, we've got to connect the dots. I know young people are unwell, and unfortunately there are some young people who have died, but what we're talking about is predominantly who is dying. It's those that are unhealthy, and we can do something about that.
Exactly.
Insulin resistance is the big common denominator. That can be like reversed in like a matter of a week or two with the right dietary prescription. So not solved, but you can start to move away from that carbohydrate intolerance picture very quickly with the right dietary advice. Have we heard this discussion once with COVID-19?
Well,
never.
Here's the thing. We've heard it from the powerful, quote-unquote, influencers, health and fitness, wellness coaches, nutritionists, dietitians like yourself. You'll hear from the Rhonda Patricks. You'll hear from Great, which is Joe Rogan's talking about in his podcast. He's talking about, why don't we talk about the immune system, how we can strengthen it, like we're talking about here. But how do we, we're creating change here through the conversation now, okay?
That's
People can go
is.
vitamin D, vitamin C, if you're overweight or obese or have some type of preventable condition, lifestyle condition, you need to address that. But do you think it's even worth the conversation, or it's even of value to discuss how we can change it from a governmental level, so then maybe our premiers and our leaders are saying, hey guys, we recommend this and this nutrition and supplement and lifestyle changes. You're going to have this and this diminished decrease of a risk of respiratory illness, of this, of that. Can we do that? How do we do that?
Well, it's been going on for a number of years. So COVID aside, with the sugar tax, obviously that was the first sort of big intervention at a government level. But like, the unfortunate reality, which is not dissimilar to that vaccine conversation, it's governed by big pharma, who essentially rule the Western world, and sitting next to them is big food. So, it's such a huge topic, but the reality is that like, crap food is cheap, and not us, but the majority of the world, like especially low socioeconomic and, not so Western countries, like this is almost like, unfortunately, a bit of a privileged conversation. And I get attacked for this all the time, right? But I'm also, like we are today, talking to my audience who are, pretty much all just like us. Like they live in a Western world. So we do have the choice to a degree.
It's a bit of a bubble.
Yeah. And so I'm really aware of it's so different on a global scale, but it's up to us educating those that don't quite know what they can control. But yeah, the government needs to step in, because the healthy food is still expensive, or they think it's expensive, and there's lots of barriers and myths around that need to be broken down in time as well.
So it sounds like it comes down to continual education and leadership from the community. Is
I think it's going to be a grassroots project for sure, like we're already doing, because of the fact that certain research is being suppressed. And, you know, I I'm feeling really frustrated about this whole situation. Like, there's so much more I want to say, but it's such a sensitive topic that part of me feels like um it's almost not worth it sometimes, but I'm not willing to step down. So it's just so complicated. There's so many nuances and areas that need to be addressed, but certainly with us and who we interact with, and that flow on effect when, one person in a family or household makes a change, like, that's kind of a slow way to do it, but it's still us taking back our control.
Yeah,
And we can't ignore what we eat and what role that plays for our immune system and our microbiome health.
absolutely. I mean, I think what you're saying. Can you touch on the privilege thing? I just want to understand that argument people are trying to make. What was your
So
feeling
you
there?
and I are like, basically, in summary, you and I are like, you know what, just eat healthy and don't be overweight, and then you won't be a risk factor for COVID. But you and I can afford healthy food, and we have access to it. So what about all the people in third world countries that are dying of COVID? They're not sitting around eating junk food. They don't even have access to healthy food and water. So they've obviously got really different risk factors. And it's a privileged thing to say it's just about fixing your food, because not everyone has that capacity. So the vaccine argument is like, we need a vaccine because we need to be able to help those that can't buy vitamin C and vitamin D and berries and kiwi fruit. So I'm just really conscious of that global conversation. But I don't think those of us in the West should be lining up for a vaccine and sending all of our power away, at least without doing the foundations like you and I are discussing today.
Okay, so all right. So the conversation there sounds like I just need to needing to acknowledge that there are numerous populations who are under oppression or under certain much lower social economic opportunities. And that isn't a problem in of itself, right? That has a whole bunch of cascade of downstream consequences that I think we all can step up and address and talk about as well. But I don't think it should diminish from the conversation that while there's a lot of people struggling, there's a lot of people who are also middle class and can afford good food, but they just choose not to. Right? Yeah. And I don't know the statistics on how many COVID blah 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 people died and based on their socioeconomic status. I don't know. Okay, but why don't we control what we can control? And so to me that sounds like maybe you can't afford really high quality nutrition, but here's what you can afford to do. You can afford to go outside and go for a walk. You can afford, if you have a smartphone, which if you're listening and watching to this, you do, you can afford to educate yourself for free on the litany of information and start taking steps towards improving your lifestyle. Now that takes discipline, it takes resilience, it takes a commitment. But I think we need to empower the community and the individuals to take responsibility for their actions. Look, you don't choose where you're born. It's maybe not your fault the way you are, but it's damn sure your responsibility to fix yourself, right? We sit here because we were once in a position of poorer health, right? We had to earn this position. And I think people look at us, and I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but people look at us like we're privileged, like you were born into this. And some people are, but I mean, I'm not going to get into health issues I've had, and we don't have to get into health issues you've had, but they exist. And we're here for a reason. And so maybe we can talk to each other and say, how can I help you improve your well-being and health? And so,
I think it's just important to acknowledge that it's not a separate conversation, but it's almost separate advice for those that have the fortune to be able to make those choices. But that's essentially who we're talking to right now. So I think that's what's important. Educating ourselves, I could not agree more. Perhaps turning off the news to a degree, and yeah, looking at what you can control. Like that is number one, because there is so much we can do.
There is, and I hope people can take something from
Mm,
this conversation where they can feel like they have a bit more control and autonomy over their
mm.
decisions. Is there anything else you want to touch on there? Anything you want to acknowledge? Maybe some pent up things that you want to address, at least in this open dialogue format, or is yeah,
Around COVID in particular.
yeah, or the immune system and
Mm.
being proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that we have to start to think about when we're talking about the immune system is the role of the microbiome.
Yep.
Like, because the immune system is really complicated. Like, I can't even talk to it in entire detail. That's definitely not my expertise. But what we do know is that 80% of the immune system is found in our gut. So it's the role of the microbiome that I think is the next level for people to start to understand, just top level. But, it's quite easy to say, eat these fruit and vegetables that are high in vitamin C, take some vitamin C, take some vitamin D. Great. So we're building on that. And then we understand, all right, so what's next when it comes to our microbiome? So I think that's a really important part of the conversation, because we are just the human host. We are 90 to 90%, 99% bacteria. So we've really got to understand the role of that. And of course, the diet is the priority. What I've found really kind of ironic, and circling back to something I said before around the pandemic, is at least in Australia, people are selling, like literally selling the supermarkets out of the worst packet fried food, all the middle aisles full of the convenient refined carbohydrates. Everyone's developing an addiction to baking their own bread and overdoing the carbs, and all that sugar in that picture is going to direct our microbiome to be more pro-inflammatory
Yep.
in nature.
Yep.
And that's obviously not what we want. We want to create this beautiful anti-inflammatory microbiome full of these beneficial microbes that form a huge part of our immune system. So refined sugars got to go. We've got to look at reducing our intake of refined carbohydrates. And there's like so much more that we can do, which I'll talk to you about today. But as a foundation, we want to have a lot of fiber, because fiber is king when it comes to our microbiome health. It almost sounds too simple and too good to be true. But if we look at any of the literature that's coming out, in recent years around gut health or the microbiome, the answer is a really high dietary fiber intake. So soluble and insoluble fiber, resistant starch. So we're really feeding our biome and creating that anti-inflammatory environment, which is again our defense to the outside world. So making us more robust from the inside out.
Absolutely, and I think when we talk about the gut microbiome, I think it can become a very heady conversation, and I think you've really touched on it quite broadly and nicely to overview it. But it can become quite bogged down in nuance and science. But what do you think? One thing. I mean, you mentioned the fiber. Yeah. Well, like we mentioned that improving fiber content. We mentioned reducing sugar and refined carbohydrates. But I think there's a big psychological aspect to these foods, and people get addicted to them. People associate them with certain behaviors. How do you think people can actually create that behavior change, and how, as coaches, can we help that and facilitate that?
Yeah, in my sort of role, the first pillar is blood sugar control.
Okay.
So we all know that the blood sugar control is one thing that's a stable blood sugar during the day, which creates our ongoing food choices, determines whether we have things like sugar cravings or 330itis or the desire to overeat as the day goes on. So that blood sugar roller coaster that a lot of people are on means that they're more susceptible to want to eat sugary foods or carby foods, and to not feel like or crave things like broccoli. And so that, I think, as coaches, like we've really got to look at macros and micros to teach our clients that really one of their biggest goals is blood sugar control. And it does start from that first meal of the day. But we also don't want to perpetuate the Western model of having to eat breakfast the moment that we wake up. So it's very individual. And then, of course, meal timing and fasting windows and things like that are also very individual. So, I do a lot of that work with my one-on-one clients to kind of design their day to help with blood sugar control. But a lot of it is actually being confident to step away from probably what we were taught in school, right? So like what I would have learned at uni, I imagine what you learned in your training, Alex, it's quite conventional. It's quite low calorie. It's quite low fat. You have to eat every 2 hours to speed up your metabolism. And these are all myths that are funded by big food. And it's not a coincidence when someone unlearns that and realizes they don't have to eat every 2 hours. They don't have to eat the food pyramid and all the 6 to 11 serves of whole grains per day. They don't have to eat 400 to 600 grams of carbs per day. Fats won't make you fat. Like all of these things that we're unlearning over the last 5 decades for some people is a journey, but it's our role to break down those myths and translate it well enough to our clients who are just the consumer.
Absolutely. I mean, you've already touched on like such huge topics, right? But here's the thing. People make conclusions based off a snippet or 10 minutes of conversation, but these are extremely nuanced conversations, right? And there is a litany of evidence and research. How do you think people can best critically think to analyze data and to make decisions based on the information? Because in an age where people headline read and make quick decisions, how can we become better thinkers, you think?
For those of us educational role or a coach role, I actually think a little bit of biohacking trial and error can be interesting, because it's really hard to believe someone who's telling you the opposite of what you've always known for like your whole life. So trying it out for yourself could be really fascinating. Like a lot of people that come to see me have digestive issues or microbiome issues, or like even if it's something as basic as bloating. And they're the people that have been told to eat every 2 hours, and they're really bound by their appetite. So when they look at me and I've told them that they could possibly only need 3 meals a day, no snacks, they look afraid. Like they can't fathom the idea of not eating every couple of hours. But that's a product of their environment, of their poor blood sugar control, of their incorrect macronutrient balance. And then you change things. So like you turn it upside down and give them, whole food carbs, but quality protein, healthy fats. The proof's in the pudding. They go away and they don't need to eat every 2, and they might be eating every 4 hours, and all their symptoms are resolved. So they didn't believe me initially, but when they found out and felt the benefits themselves, they're a convert. So we can do that ourselves as coaches. We can just try a few things. And then in terms of the literature, it is about taking a deeper dive and obviously not headline reading, and rather than relying on Facebook, like jump into PubMed or similar and spend the time like helping to unlearn some of those myths that we've all been taught for so long.
Absolutely. I think that's a key. One point I think I'd recommend to people is learn from people who are already spending their life distilling the information, right? Like, I mean, we mentioned Rhonda Patrick before, like she has these huge comprehensive articles on all these different topics, right? If you are curious on COVID or the efficacy of vitamin D or this supplement or that supplement, I think we should seek out these health professionals, even like yourself, who are diving deep into women's health and the menstrual cycle and pregnancy, so you can make better decisions. And then you said, what was that last thing you said? Excuse me.
Breaking down myths. Like we were talking more about how we could educate our clients, like getting them to try new strategies to, to experience it firsthand, because it's really hard to convince someone that what they've always been told is wrong. Like that's what I have found, especially around like the carb and fat conversation. Like nearly everyone is coming to me and they've been told, not to have certain fats like butter, and they've been told to cut the fat off their meats, and all that, like that huge conversation around, especially the demonization of saturated fats. And they're really afraid to eat those foods. And they almost have to start quite gradually, but the proof is in the pudding in terms of how they feel as a result, but also what their blood profiles do,
Yes.
especially if it's around that sort of cholesterol and statin conversation and that area of health, which I think is probably the biggest area of malpractice that we've seen in the last 5 decades, because it's an incorrect lipid hypothesis and people are taking statin drugs and it's, suppressing their inbuilt cholesterol production, which is 25% of what their brain is made of. And then we're seeing an increase in Alzheimer and dementia. And we think it's a coincidence. Like, it's just not. People are depleting all of their cholesterol. What is cholesterol? It's a building block for all of our hormones, including vitamin D.
Yes.
So we need cholesterol. And we also need saturated fats because it's another building block for our hormones, right? And so there was a research paper in June, so recently, which was basically what's the word I was saying? I can't think of it right now. It'll come back to me. But like proving that saturated fats weren't going to cause heart disease or cardiovascular disease. Yet we don't see that being spoken about in the media. It gets shared on Facebook a few times by those of us that are really passionate about the topic. We don't see the conversation being had in the media because big food don't want us to know that whole foods are good for us, because then we won't be buying avocados, or we won't be buying, free range eggs. We'll be buying packets and boxes. So educating ourselves is so important, because these amazing studies that literally disprove a 50-year theory are being hidden from us.
Yeah. And
like, that's malpractice.
Absolutely. And to touch on cholesterol, we need to make the point that most of it is made endogenously in the body, right? So when people see these high cholesterol levels, we have to dive in. How much of that is really from nutrition versus lifestyle versus genetic too, right?
Yeah, well, only 1 to 2% is influenced by the diet.
Oh,
1 to 2%.
Right. See, I've heard like 10 to 20, but even like whatever it is low, right? It is very low relative to versus what your body makes. Please keep going. 100%.
Yeah. So that's the issue. Is people have been told not to eat saturated fat, like that's going to solve the issue, when it only influences our blood lipid profile by 1 to 2%. So that doesn't make sense. So the big picture is what we're understanding now is that inflammation is the issue. So we know that inflammation is linked with most, if not all, chronic diseases. And inflammation of the heart is cardiovascular disease. So what do we look for? Well, total cholesterol by itself tells us nothing about the level of inflammation. So we don't really need to even look at the total cholesterol. We need it for our ratios. So we're still going to be testing for it. But firstly, we look at our triglycerides to make sure they're less than 1 Australian units, because that shows us whether we're inflammatory or not. So less than 1 is the goal. And then we want to dive deeper into our ratios. So what I mean by that is we look at the total cholesterol to HDL ratio, which actually gives us a fairly good indication of LDL particle size. Let's take a step back. Most people know that HDLs have been called good and LDLs have been called bad cholesterol.
But it's not that simple.
In itself incorrect.
Yeah, please go.
So HDL is positive, but LDLs have what we call subfractions. So we can have large, fluffy LDL particles, which protect the heart, or we can have small, dense LDL particles, which carry plaque and contribute to clogging our arteries and cardiovascular disease. So total cholesterol to the HDL ratio, less than 3.5 is our goal. Large, fluffy LDL particles, which are good. If our total cholesterol to HDL ratio is too high, so 5 and above, then it indicates that we have too many small, dense LDLs and we need to make change. But what fixes inflammation? Whole food diet, high omega-3 intake, losing weight, exercising, not having any nutrient deficiencies, including vitamin D. So it's largely preventable. Of course, there are genetic exceptions, but for the majority of us, cardiovascular disease shouldn't exist.
Yeah, let's clarify. You said for the majority. You didn't say for everybody. It's not black and white. You're saying that, and you know what? I think it touches on, it makes me think, how much would we really be talking about viruses like the COVID?
Yeah, I agree with you.
If we had 5 to 10% of our population overweight or obese.
I could not agree more. Look at America. I mean, everyone's losing their mind over there about the death rates, but they have the worst health status. It's not a coincidence.
No.
They have the worst food system. Like, we have to do something longer term, because hopefully you and I won't see another pandemic, but I've already got one child and I don't want her to have to go through this when she's my age. And so, we need much broader changes, because if we didn't have all of our chronic lifestyle diseases, well, we probably wouldn't have a death rate like we do.
Yes.
And then we wouldn't have this global fear pandemic.
But it makes sense why they're responding the way they do, because we don't want to see death. We don't want to see illness. Of course not. And so they're going to respond with...
It's reactive.
Yeah. They're going to react with what they have, what their population is able to cope against. And so I get it, right? But, let's take some steps in creating monumental change, because what's a better trigger for revolutionizing and reframing the perspective on changing people's health than this? Maybe that can be the big positive that comes from it.
Well, those of us that are sort of in this space have been saying it's the global awakening. So I do see a massive change it's almost like we've had the wool pulled off, because in the West, we've essentially been sheep. We've been, yes, sir, no, sir. We've been following the food pyramid. We've been taking our pharmaceuticals. We've been, good boys and good girls. And a lot of people are really sick as a result. And then even though COVID has been horrific, the plus is that those that are have their eyes open are really understanding what role they play. And there is a bigger awakening, like those that never really looked at their health or looked at their vitamin D levels are starting to do this. So it will be positive long term. That's obviously quite a slow process, but it has to start somewhere. Yes. And this pandemic has been a huge catalyst for that. I think that's incredible.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a quote I keep repeating by Napoleon Hill. I'm paraphrasing, but with every seed of adversity, there's an equal opportunity of benefit.
Totally agree.
So we all have
to... the crisis before the rebuild,
Yeah, we all have to find that opportunity of benefit. And that... expresses itself, I believe, through this reframing of health and wellness. But we could keep diving deeper into all this stuff for hours, I think. But
for sure,
I want to, I'm satisfying my own curiosity with all this stuff right now. But
I love it.
Also having to understand Orphic education. We are a business and company that delivers certificate 3s and 4s in fitness to create trainers, personal trainers and coaches.
Yeah,
and so
awesome.
How we teach is going to be critically important to creating that change from a systemic level. And that's why we want to talk to people like you. And so for a lot of the coaches and trainers listening, what do you think are the biggest gaps in knowledge that younger coaches and trainers and even, very well established have on nutrition and wellness? What would you tell them?
Well, I actually think it starts with the calorie fallacy, because I used to be a personal trainer as well, so I get what the world is like. That world is like, but it was a long time ago. So what I don't want to do is speak to what the education is like now, because I'm not across what you guys are teaching. But I'm curious. Maybe you could give me a little bit of insight. Like, what level do you go in with teaching your trainers how to prescribe calories and macros and things like that?
Okay. I'll tell you 2 answers. One, what the majority do, and one, what we do, right?
Okay, awesome. Mm-hmm.
So one, what the majority do is the training.gov in certificate 3s and 4s, they prescribe one module of nutrition. One module can be, a decent amount of time. We're talking, 5, 10 to 20 hours, right? Depending on the organization. However, we have to look at the quality of that information is usually not the highest, generally speaking, because it's based on, very surface level information, very traditional medicine, traditional food practice. However, for us, especially for me, being able to have control and autonomy over what we create and teach, it's completely different. It's the conversation we're having, which is what we want to make. So there's 2 boats. The majority over here, traditional, and the minority over here, just trying to become the majority.
Yeah. which is so good to, like, it's just incredible. I think it so needs to happen, because
Absolutely.
unfortunately I'm still seeing too many people that think that 1200 calories is the magic number. And with all due respect, it's not helped by programs like Michelle Bridges, who still follow that calorie fallacy. And the issue with that, which most of you guys will know, is that it's just not enough fuel. It causes
Absolutely.
that starvation mode, and for women, a huge host of psychological and
Yes.
hormonal issues, amenorrhea, fertility issues, and so on and so forth. And it's a really hard road to come back from, because when someone tells you that you're not going to gain weight if you eat 1700 calories, how the hell do you get your head around that when you've only believed the calories in, calories out model? So, this is an area that I've worked in for over 10 years now, and it's a challenging process. But obviously, with you guys not delivering 1200 calories in the first place, that's going to be such a huge part of the journey, because we need fuel, but we also need to understand our metabolism, because we can burn fat in an environment of adequate calories if we control things like our insulin levels, which comes back to our carbohydrate intake, our hormones, which also comes back to key nutrients like omega-3s and magnesium, but also making sure that we're not under-eating, that we're not in that starvation mode or overtraining. So, I obviously practice under a lower carbohydrate model. People online think I give everyone keto, which is bullshit, if I could swear for a moment.
You
But
can.
I do tend towards the lower carbohydrate side of things, especially in the weight loss environment, because we want to keep our insulin low so our body can burn fat, so dietary fat, but fat stores, and then we can eat more food, focusing on quality, of course, rather than just if it fits your macros. But understanding physiology 101, like, you don't need to have done a degree in it, but it's just really understanding how we can create that metabolic environment for fat loss, and then of course how it differs if it's muscle gain. But in that area, I still don't prescribe, buckets of protein and meals every 2 hours either. Like, I've also worked with many people with quite a different model for muscle gain. And that's what my goal is, to be creating a model that's sustainable. Because anyone can eat every 2 hours and eat chicken and broccoli and, 300 grams of protein a day for a period of time, but it's not sustainable. So it's not going to achieve the results long term. So it is about, the myths, breaking down the myths. And for you guys that are grassroots from an education point of view, making sure that you really understand that and you know how to do it individually, because we don't want blanket advice, because our clients are all very different.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because we need to clarify that always, because people take what you say as a blanket statement.
Yeah.
But you talked about wanting to gain muscle, for example, and I think bucket loads of protein and carbohydrates, that not being sustainable. And I think the unfortunate thing for people like myself, people who have very aggressive performance or body composition goals, is it can be quite antithetical to longevity and health, because there's a thing called the dispensable soma theory by Thomas Kirkwood. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you?
I haven't, but it's fascinating already to me.
Well, all it means, it's just describes this performance and growth longevity trade-off, that there's this trade-off to DNA repair
For sure.
and aging.
Eating all the time, autophagy. Yeah.
Exactly. And that, someone wanting to be the most effective possible at performance and muscular hypertrophy may have to put those things aside for a period of time. Do you have any
tightrope?
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on walking that tightrope? I know I try and do it by implementing different fasting regimes and supplements and controlling my metabolic health. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a tightrope for sure, because like everyone knows about fasting and autophagy for longevity, and obviously the telomere conversation. But then, of course, when you're trying to gain, you need to eat a lot of calories. It's impossible to do in an 8-hour window, right? So that's the challenge that we face. But I also think that we can't assume that one day of fasting a week is going to be detrimental to our goals. Like, I would never prescribe 7 days of fasting to you if you were my client, right? Versus if I had an overweight male who wanted to lose weight and not get heart disease, well, he could do 16-8 till the cows come home, right? Because he's probably on the knees 2 meals a day. And so that's where it starts to get really individual. It's not just males v females. So, I think it is going to be a little bit of trial and error. Like, just start with one day of 16-8, have 2 really high quality meals. You can still have 2,000 calories there quite easily. So it's not no food. It might not be 3,000, but you could still be getting the best of both worlds by testing a little bit of fasting or a little bit of, the DNA repair, and then every day committing to at least a 12-hour or maybe a circadian rhythm fast, which does show a lot of health benefits as well, but isn't a more sort of extreme version as 16-8. Optimizing your pathology. Go on.
Oh, I'm just saying, you're referring to time-restricted eating? Dr. Volta Longo stuff?
Longo, but I mean, it's really the work of Dr. Sachin Panda at the Panda Institute, or the Salk Institute rather. And so he's doing all the research around TRF, which is really fascinating. And 13-11 is really sustainable as well, which 16-8 isn't for everybody, and certainly isn't, to be prescribed to women too much, and certainly not prescribed in preconception, pregnancy, breastfeeding, etc. So it needs to be really individualized when we're talking about 16-8. More so for women, but definitely for men who have got that muscle gain performance goal.
Yeah, awesome. That definitely clarifies, some practical steps that maybe you don't have to be as aggressive with your fasting interventions, but you can still implement it on a weekly basis and still walk that tightrope and get maybe some benefits for DNA repair and autophagy, decrease inflammation, and still have your other 6 days or whatever amount of days in a surplus and working towards your goals.
Yeah, I agree. And then other strategies like optimizing your pathology. Like, people just don't get their bloods tested.
No.
Like, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's not that hard to do. You do have to find a good doctor. So
Yes.
that's a little bit of a hiccup or a roadblock sometimes. But it's so important. Like, why are we guessing about our health? Like, my little motto is test, don't guess.
Yeah.
So if you want to know how to live a long life, get some data.
Yeah.
Do a full suite of bloods every 6 months, or even more frequently if there's a specific goal or intervention going on. Like, with my clients, it's every year or every 6 months, depending on what we're working on. But if anyone's got like a thyroid issue or really low vitamin D or hormonal issue, or like what looks like cardiovascular disease around the corner, we're going to test it every 3 months because we want to know what's working and how the intervention's going.
Absolutely.
So data is king.
And it's a strange world we live in where people get their car serviced more than their body. It's very, like...
I know, right?
When I heard that, I'm like, oh, wow. It's
actually quite a light bulb moment for a lot of people, because they're like, when was the last time you got your bloods done? And they can't recall.
Oh,
unless they've been unwell.
And here's another thing. And I think there's a resistance. Oh, health professionals are expensive. I can't afford to hire Steph Lowe. I can't afford to hire Alexander. Like, okay. Some people, they can't. I understand. Yeah. They just can't. You are just getting by. But when you audit and challenge people, and you'd be like, all right, how much did you spend on servicing your home appliances and your car? Because people spend thousands of dollars on servicing their car a year. How much did you spend on servicing your body?
Yeah. It's a matter of priorities. Like, honestly, the amount that Australia's been drinking during this pandemic, like, you've seen it on the news, it's horrific. Everyone's like becoming an alcoholic because they're at home, all day.
Yeah.
What about that money? Like, that adds up. It's doable.
Sure.
It's just a matter of priorities. And then, there's all those barriers and myths that people have as well, because people will still think healthy food is expensive, full stop. But there's also smart ways to shop. And I think what COVID has done is shone some light on that. Like, for years, like, I think probably 5 years now, my family and I have been buying our grass-fed meat in bulk from a farm. And everyone has thought I was crazy. Like, people look at me like I have two heads when I say, we just bought a deep freezer, we get our meat and we spend a couple $100 and we do it like a couple of times a year. People thought I was totally nuts.
Why? What was the resistance?
Because it's just not Coles. It's just not convenient. It's just not, you have to be a little bit more organized, and it's different to what I've always done, like going to Coles, buying poor quality meat. And then COVID, not long when the first wave happened, we got an email from the farm that we shop from saying they had sold out. And I was just like so overwhelmed with happiness for them that people, I mean, they couldn't get their meat from Coles because it had sold out, but it had opened our eyes to other ways of shopping, which are also more affordable and sustainable and environmentally sustainable ways to shop. And that's been another bonus because, Coles was run out. So we've had to find a way elsewhere. Hopefully we can keep some of these habits on the other side.
Absolutely.
I love that. Shopping locally and knowing your farmer rather than your doctor.
And knowing the local butchers you have who communicate to the farmers. And that's a great way to support your community and get really high quality food. But I think I want to finish off and be like, okay, give us like the people who maybe can't even afford to buy in bulk. They typically shop at Coles and these grocery supermarkets, getting cheaper foods. Can you give us like strategies or just one or two things people can do to buy quality food at a good, affordable price?
Quality food at an affordable price is the markets. So if you're not buying in bulk, you're going to the markets like Dandenong markets. It's probably one of the more affordable ones. It's only half an hour away for most people. Or you go to Queen Vic later in the day on a Saturday or a Sunday when things are being given away more cheaply because it's the end of trade. So I think there are definitely better ways to shop, which also don't support big companies that don't really care about our health. We're supporting small business, as you said. We're shopping smartly, and then we actually make food a priority. If you did your hour of power or your food prep on a Sunday, you'd have a meal for a week, or you could start to stock up the freezer, no food wastage, not as much time in the kitchen, a great way to cook different cuts of meats, not just chicken breasts that don't even actually give us any nutrients. We want to eat nose to tail and learn how to cook that way as well. So a cheap slow cooker or a beautiful big pot that you can put on the stove, and prioritizing your food. Like most people who first come to see me, they think about dinner at 7 p.m. They have to then go to Coles and buy all the ingredients, get home and cook. It's then 8 p.m.
Reactive.
That's reactive. Exactly. So food needs to come up to almost number one on the priority list. And we need to have a little plan. It doesn't take a lot of time or money, but it needs to be a priority.
I think that's really practical right there, especially going after when, they're trying to sell their goods at the markets, that they're closing soon. I feel like that can often be cheaper than sometimes shopping at a supermarket.
Way cheaper than Coles. Their grass-fed range is expensive. And so, of course, we want to buy quality for the environment and for the animals, but not at the expense of that. Certainly, there are cheaper ways to do it and to look after the animals and the environment and our health as well.
Steph, I want to be respectful of your time. I could talk to you for hours.
I'll come back on. I'd love to have another chat.
Absolutely. I would love to. And I'm going to actually DM you right now. Just one more thing I want to touch on just off air.
Sure.
But is there any last thing you want to touch on, comment on, acknowledge, or any asks of the audience, suggestions, or just where people can find you?
Yeah, I think just a few things. It's, let's keep spreading the knowledge that we have to continue to empower our audience with knowledge, because that's number one, for sure. Two, I think let's not neglect the foundations, because we can get a little bit out here with pills and potions. We've got to make sure that we're building our house from the ground up, not from the roof. So always talking to our clients and our audience about those foundations and reiterating the importance of those lifestyle and dietary choices. And, I think diving into the literature. So like you've done, you really understand what's going on at the moment so that you can talk to your clients about the pandemic and what they can do rather than just believing what we read on the news.
Yeah.
You guys can follow me online at the Natural Nutritionist. Either .com.au is my online hub, or on the socials. I'd love to speak to any of you, and I'm sure we can create a list of topics for future conversations, because there's lots of juicy topics we can dive into moving forward.
Absolutely. I look forward to the next ones and even meeting you in person again, which
turns out we know each other.
Yes, that we talked about before. Thank you so much, Steph. I appreciate your time. I love this.
Pleasure. So good.
All right. I'll speak to you soon.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
Did you get it?
You got to hang up so I can outro this call.
Okay. You want me to go?
Yeah. I'll talk to you in a second.
Bye.
So, yeah. All right. That's what I needed. Woo! Steph Lowe. I love that conversation. I get so excited talking about this stuff. It is so extremely important. And I hope it was valuable to you guys. Just grounding the conversation in some practical things that we can do to improve our health, our nutrition, our wellness, and our immune system. Not being reactive, being proactive. What about people who don't have a lot of money? What can you do to improve your health? Some steps you can take. Talking about the science of supplementation, vitamin D, vitamin C. Vitamin C is really cheap. Vitamin D is really cheap. You can get access to that, and you can supply yourself and your family with some just better decisions and revolutionize your health that way. Whew! All right, guys. This is Webinar Wednesday. We've done more than 10 of these. Every Wednesday we release them. We've talked to a bunch of different guests, health professionals all across the country, and even the world. This was Steph Lowe. We're going to be talking to... I'm forgetting. I will let you... We'll just stay tuned. We're going to be talking to some more guests in the future every Wednesday. All these conversations are on YouTube and all podcast platforms. So you can listen to them, watch them, and enjoy them. And then you can go to Webinar Wednesday on our orphiceducation.com website and put in your email if you want to be notified of these future conversations. Thank you so much, guys, for listening and watching. I'm Alexander Emanuel. You can catch me on the internet if you want to see me talk some more. Otherwise, thank you for listening, guys, and stay healthy. Get outside, go for a walk, go for a run, challenge your mind and body, and we're all going to be all right.